What if your greatest weakness was actually your greatest strength? What if the things that you think are holding you back in life actually have the potential to propel you forward? Whether that's in health, wealth, relationships, whatever you're trying to move forward in, whatever success definition you're using, what if those things that you think are your biggest problems are actually the opposite? If you look at the history of success, there's just hundreds, maybe thousands of examples of people with just massive problems who still became very successful. And the misplaced word there is still, because in many cases, I suspect that it's actually because of the problem they became successful. Franklin Roosevelt was paralyzed from the waist down from polio. Oprah Winfrey had this horrible, sexually abusive childhood. Even somebody like Richard Branson, totally dyslexic, has hundreds of companies, probably wouldn't be able to do high-level work without dyslexia, right? And so in your life, I don't know what it is that is holding you back, whether it's a physical limitation, a learning disability, mental and emotional challenges. I'm not sure what it is, but it's possible that if you flip your perspective, if you start to look at the skills, experiences, unique ability, unique experiences, unique voice that you have, it's possible that those things could turn into a big advantage for you. One of the pleasant things about getting older is this ability to have the self-awareness to see what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. I'm still kind of learning. But I think it's really a big part of discernment is understanding, hey, what do I have to offer this job, this situation, this relationship, and where are my limitations, and how can I turn my limitations into advantages, not by working around them, but in some cases, leveraging them. If you're new here, it's the Lucas Rockwood Show. I'm your host. I'm a yoga teacher. I'm a trainer. I'm a serial entrepreneur and a father. But first and foremost, I'm a student. I like learning things. So I go out into the world and find academics and researchers and yoga teachers and mind-body experts. And I try to bring their best work to here on the show, share their work with you. So hopefully you can live a more fulfilled life, and selfishly, me too. On this week's show, we'll be talking to an associate professor at Harvard who's done a bunch of research around what she calls the edge. I think you'll find it very useful. Your questions, comments, and feedback are most welcome. Send me a message on Instagram. I'm taking direct messages. I answer them all. It's at Lucas Rockwood. Send me a DM and I'll get right back to you. And if you send me a question, I'll put it on the show. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. So hello and welcome everybody. Today's show is called Adversity into Advantage, and I am joined here with Laura Huang. Laura is an associate professor of business administration at Harvard. She was previously assistant professor of management at Wharton. Her research has been featured in the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Forbes, and Nature. She has a new book. It's called The Edge, Turning Adversity into Advantage. It was just released. You can grab it on Amazon or else at her website, both of which we'll link up in the show notes. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
I always like to start off with definitions. You've kind of coined this phrase, the edge. What is this referring to in your world?
Yeah, I mean, I think edge really refers to this fact that, some people naturally have an advantage and others have to create one for themselves. And so, it's this aspect of we are sort of taught from a really young age that hard work should speak for itself. That if you want to achieve success and outcomes, that you put in the hard work and then it'll speak for itself. But that at some point we realize that in fact, hard work, even though it's critical, is not enough. That hard work alone isn't going to necessarily always get you those outcomes, and instead sometimes it leaves you frustrated. And so the book is really about how ordinary, everyday people who feel like they've been hitting the same wall over and over and over again can create their own edge.
And Laura, what was your adversity, or what have been some of your adversities that you've flipped into an advantage?
Yeah, I mean, I do talk a lot about my own personal examples, just in terms of everything from as a child and some of the being discounted and underestimated, and as the years went on, sort of finding myself in similar situations. And so what I try to do is both it sort of led a lot to my research, where I looked at people who are underestimated and disadvantaged and inequality, and based on both that research as well as my own personal stories and these stories of others, I really create this framework for how we can think about creating our own advantage or our own edge. And, the thing is that there are some stories of like very well-known people, and famous well-known people, but, the majority are stories of everyday people who have had to face adversity and sort of showing how they've come out on the other side. And both through the research as well as these stories, even though it's called EDGE and it's about how do you create and gain an edge for yourself, the EDGE actually stands for the framework. So the EDGE is really outlines the way in which I found in my research people can create that advantage for themselves. So, the E is for enrich. So showing and knowing how you enrich and provide value in any sort of context or situation. The problem is that we don't often have that opportunity because we either don't belong to the right networks, we don't belong to the right groups, or we just don't have that chance. And so the D is for delight, which is about how when you're able to delight somebody, when you're able to delight your counterpart and show them some piece of you that might have been unexpected or surprising or counterintuitive, that's the equivalent of being able to crack the door open a little bit so that you can show how you enrich and provide value. The G is for guide, which speaks to even when you do enrich and provide value to someone else or in some organization or on a team and you're able to delight, you have to continue guiding the perceptions of others. You have to guide them to who you are and your trajectory, and that's a lot of the, flipping things in your favor so that you can gain an edge, right? Because people are always going to have perceptions and be making attributions about you, and there's going to be stereotypes and signals and cues that are going to be dominating how they make these decisions about you. And so guiding is really about redirecting them to who you authentically are. And then the final E is for effort and hard work, because we tend to think that hard work comes first, that if we put in the hard work, that the success and outcomes will come. But in fact, effort and hard work come last. Because when you know how you enrich and delight and guide, that's when your hard work actually works harder for you.
Backloading effort makes a lot of sense because I certainly have spent a lot of my life, doing hard work that didn't really turn into anything. And you see it a lot. It doesn't matter what area you look at, whether it's academia or whether it's at the gym or whether it's with family life. People putting so much effort into things that are just clearly wrong, Yeah,
I love how you're like it's definitely this case that, you take two people who work equally as hard and one is inevitably going to be more successful than the other because of the context or the situation or signals and cues. And I'm kind of chuckling when you're saying whether it's in the workplace or whether it's in the gym, because you can work just as hard as somebody else in the gym, but they're going to, come out more trim and more fit and because, there's context and there's nuance and there's body types and there's different, and in the workplace, there's different industries and different people that you're going to be interacting with, and all of that sort of matters. And so it's really important to be able to empower yourself to know what context you're in, who you're engaging with, what that interpersonal dynamic is going to look like so that you can guide those perceptions and really make your own edge.
This concept of turning adversity into advantage, I think, is such an important one. I train a lot of yoga teachers, and they go out, and people have all kinds of limitations, whether it's scoliosis or, bad speaking voice or whatever it is, and they're so worried that it'll hold them back. And very often, the thing that you would think would give you the biggest disadvantage, people turn into an advantage. So, for example, I teach with I train a lot of teachers who don't speak in the native language that the country that they're in. So maybe they speak English and they're living in Germany, or they speak Spanish and they're living in the UK or whatever it is. And what seems like a total disadvantage, they flip, and suddenly they find an expat community, and suddenly they have access to a whole new world. But I guess where I'm going with this is you come back to this concept of fairness, which is something that I certainly spend a lot of time thinking about. A lot of people spend time fighting about. You could argue that a lot of our political systems are really based around equity and attempting to create equity. At the same time, it's just totally impossible. It's like trying to find balance in nature. There just isn't. There's a storm, and then there's a drought, and then there's a flood, and we try to keep the water at bay, but the levees break and the water comes through. And so with that in mind, I just kind of think about this. What if I just accept that the world is unfair? What if I just accept that my industry is unfair? What if I just accept that my town is unfair and someone's going to have nicer things than me and better thoughts than me and bigger ideas than me, and that just is the way it is. But in some arena, some small, weird, little niche arena, I'm going to be the guy with the best idea or the fastest legs or the something. And for me, that's really been sort of depressing and also empowering at the same time when you just take a look at things and just realize, what about me is so unique that no one could keep up? And so I'm curious if you've uncovered similar thoughts in your research.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bunch of different components there. I think what you're talking about in terms of that uniqueness, that's part of that self-awareness and knowing how you do enrich and provide value. So it's so key to sort of know, what are your superpowers? What are those basic things that you're just really, really good at? And knowing your strengths and your underappreciated strengths, but also your weaknesses. And the more that you have a very personal, authentic view of who you are, the more you're going to be able to guide the perceptions of others and delight others and be in situations where you can create that sort of advantage for yourself. I mean, I think the other thing that you sort of touched on that is really interesting is that, we do live in this world where there's this myth of meritocracy. Even though we talk so much about meritocracy, it's really, we deep down, we sort of know that things aren't fair and that there is sort of this myth. And, we're trying to change things structurally so that there is more equality and there's more parity and all of those things. But, we've been having these conversations for a really long time, and we've been trying to make change for a really long time. And so some things we are able to keep at bay and other things we are able to, and then it sort of shifts and changes. And so even as we're making these changes, sometimes the changes just don't stick. Sometimes the changes are made, but they're made too slowly. And sometimes they're made, but then it has unintended consequences, and they're not changing in the way that we thought. And so, what I think is so important, and what I find in a lot of my research is that, I should say that, I started out researching just very, very much these sort of concepts around inequality and disadvantage. And it sort of started to get depressing because I would get asked these questions like, but what can we do about it? What can we do about it? And there's a lot of research that talks about, bringing in, for example, more women mentors, when there's not gender parity, or thinking about how we do hiring and structural sort of changes. And what I found was what was kind of depressing was that there weren't a lot of strategies and tactics that individuals could take, right? So that people who were asking me, like, what can I do? What are ways that I can level the playing field for myself? And so this book really originated out of that, which is that even when these structures and these systems are imperfect, and even though we're trying to change them, I mean, it's not going to hurt to try and change these systems, but as individuals, we still need to be able to empower ourselves within imperfect structures and within imperfect systems so that we can navigate and create our own advantage even while things are trying to improve from the outside in, so that from the inside out, we're able to affect change as well.
When you're researching advantage and how to maybe quote unquote get ahead, what is your end game here? Are you hoping to study success in financial terms, success in terms of lifestyle satisfaction? What are your kind of your KPIs for, is this working or not?
Yeah. I mean, I think success is also one of those very much individually defined things. But I think in my research, I've studied a lot of workplace outcomes. So I've looked at, who gets hired for top management team positions, who gets promotions, who gets the raise, who leaves organizations. And in the startup world, I studied a lot around who gets funding for their ventures, who gets access to introductions and resources and networks, and all of those sorts of things that really determine workplace success and outcomes from the sort of conventional definitions of success. But I also talk a lot about, the fact that, a lot of times people will ask me, they'll say, well, what are the 5 steps that I should take to gaining my edge? And I mean, I would love to be able to give people like a recipe, like here's the steps you follow. But just like success is sort of individually defined, so too is your ability to find and create your own edge. Because this is what I present, the EDGE is more of a perspective. It's a perspective that when you make it authentically yours and you think about how you personally guide and how you personally delight and enrich, and not just how you personally do so, but how you do so vis-a-vis who your counterpart is. Because once you change one variable, right, the industry that you're operating in or the person that you're interacting with or the team, you change one thing and those perceptions and those signals and those cues are completely different. So the more you make this a perspective that you engage with rather than here are the 5 steps that I should follow, the more you're going to understand your own personal definitions of success as well as your own personal path to achieving that success.
The reason I ask is I see a lot of these studies and a lot of inequity studies kind of benchmarking off of C-suite jobs in Fortune 500 companies and political positions of power. I know they're easy to measure, and I'm just like, I don't know. Here's sort of an idea that I've been noodling around with. What if those jobs are not the best? What if those are the high IQ coal miner jobs? Do you know what I mean? What if what if those are the biggest losers masked as winners? I mean, the self-sacrifice of mental health, personal time, family balance. I'm just not sure. I'm just not sure that we should be benchmarking off of C-suite Fortune 500 companies, which is always what all this data comes back to, or high-level political power. Is the fact that those are dominated by heterosexual white males? Is that a sign of their power, or is that the sign of that they're the high IQ coal miners that we've got to sacrifice everything? I don't know. This is just something I've been thinking lately. Because man, I would not want one of those jobs. I would not want one of those. That doesn't seem like an advantage to me.
Yeah, what happens a lot of times is that, we're in a socially embedded world, and so we often even, in terms of the determinants of success or even the objectives of success, so much of it is so socially determined that we see other people doing something and we're like, oh, hey, either that's something that looks desirable and that's something that I want to be doing, or hey, I could be doing that, or it seems sort of unfair because it's something that I could be doing, but yet, or why are the rewards so incommensurate with what the job actually is? And I think that speaks to what you're sort of saying. There's certain people who definitely wouldn't want to do it, but yet the financial rewards or sort of the explicit rewards are sort of incentivizing people to want certain things, even if they don't inherently necessarily want it, or if it inherently doesn't jive with who they are. And so I think that gets tricky because, and there's also cultural differences and there's individual level differences. And it sort of points to this fact that we also, when we see something, either for the financial rewards or whatever those explicit rewards look like, we sometimes go to somebody and we see a CEO of a company, for example, and we're like, I want to be that. And so we ask that person, how did you get there? And they talk about okay, then I went to school and studied this, and then I took a role in this, and then I worked in sales a little bit, and then I did this. And then we sort of there's all these hundreds of people that sort of follow that path, thinking that that's going to get them to that endpoint. And the problem is that when you ask somebody, how did you get there, and you follow that exact path, that's actually that's the worst thing. That's the worst path for you to follow because you're a very different person. And so even if you follow the exact same path, you would inevitably get to a different endpoint. And so part of it is sort of navigating our own journeys while we're still recognizing that we're in this socially situated environment. One sort of, natural experiment here is that, in the United States, one of the professions that's considered the most elite or sort of the most, not rewarding, but I guess rewarding also, but the most elite and sort of, revered is being a physician, being a doctor, right? You get paid you get paid a lot, you're sort of respected, you're seen as highly educated and all sorts of things. But in other countries, right, in some countries in Asia, for example, or in other countries, physicians actually don't make quite a lot of money. In fact, there's lots of physicians. The path is very different. It's not quite this degree of reverence. And it's seen as more of like a trade job. Like it's something that you're delivering a service to your country rather than, and so, you can see sort of the difference between, cultures in terms of perceptions. And so I do think it's an important point for people to remember is that we're so easily guided by others rather than staying true to our own North Star and our own compass.
So with your work and your book and your research, what are you hoping to impart upon people, or how are you hoping this empowers people to, increase self-awareness or whether it's career or personal life? What are you hoping they take away?
Yeah, I think there's two things. When I first started writing the book, the person that I really, as I was writing, the person I kept visualizing was like this book. I was writing it for that person who was really aspirational and knew that he or she could achieve what it was that he or she was dreaming about and wanted, but for whatever reason was facing barriers because other people underestimated them or because something was designed in such a way that it was just preventing them from getting there. Either their background or where they'd been or how they'd grown up or people who had entered their lives or decision makers that weren't giving them the benefit of the doubt, all those sorts of things. And it was really around like empowering that person to believe that you can flip those things in your favor. You can flip those negative stereotypes in your favor so that you can achieve those sort of things, that you really can operate. And there will be failures and there will be drawdowns, but that you could use those to actually make you better and achieve those sort of things that you needed to achieve. Like that was sort of the initial. But, as I started writing it as well, the other sort of audience that increasingly came into my mind was parents who are trying to raise kids. And I increasingly saw, especially as like a professor who I get asked a lot like about parenting advice and, because their kids are entering college or and I kept seeing how parents are trying so hard. Parents, you love your children and you want to give them every opportunity that you can. And some parents can't. And even the parents that can, you see them trying to give their kids an advantage by, extra tutors, private coaches, exposure to lots of extracurricular activities. And instead, I found that these kids, these children were, maybe getting an advantage in one dimension of their life. But instead of doing that, instead of parents fighting so hard to give their kids an edge, why not teach your kids how to create their own advantage, how to create their own edge in any situation? And that's about, teaching them to know, like, what are they really good at? In what ways do they enrich and provide value? Letting them sort of be who they are so that they can delight and guide and be able to understand how they're being perceived by others in any situation so that you don't have to, as a parent, go out and do it for them, that they're enabled and empowered to do it themselves. And so I thought that was something that, not only for individuals and teams and organizations who are trying to gain an edge, but also for others when we're trying to help others. I thought this framework was something that I was really speaking to those people about as well.
I think that's a really great insight with kids. With my kids, same thing. I'm always just trying to give them experiences and opportunities. It's like I always tell them I'm not here for swag. I'm just here for experiences and opportunities. You can worry about the swag on your own time. But I think this is really true because one of the things, I became a really great student later in my late teens, and I was naturally good at school, which basically just means I didn't do any work until I was 15 or something like that. But until I learned how to learn, I didn't enjoy school. When I learned how to learn, I'm just still to this day, I'm just such a great student. But nobody ever taught me how to learn, meaning how to work with the tools that I have, which, are limited. I learned great through audio. I really struggle to read. They're just these kind of really simple things that somebody, not even anybody really high level, but could really help me figure out in like a 20-minute, chat when I was 12. It would have made a big difference. But I think learning how to learn, learning how to make the most of what you have, whether it's a speaking voice to go on a podcast, or whether it's amazing hair that people want to see on Instagram, or whatever you've got. I mean, everybody's got something. Some people have got a brain that can crunch numbers and figuring out what you have. And I think the only other thing that I kind of put into that thing is like communication. I just think, like everybody says, the information age. I'm like, I'm not sure. I think it's the communication age, because none of this information is really valuable. It's actually getting devalued because there's so much. But people who can communicate effectively seem to really stand out by whatever means, whether it's photographic or videos or speaking or writing. I just think this is a meta skill that people are not emphasizing enough. This idea that you don't have to learn how to type, or that you don't have to learn how to write a business letter or something. I just think that's such a mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think all of those things apply, and that's sort of those subtle things that you can absolutely hone.
So you're neck deep in academia, and I'm curious, academia is just getting so much scrutiny recently. Everybody's just slamming it. And of course, the biggest people slamming academia are those with the best degrees, which I find a little bit ironic. But I'm curious. I don't have a horse in the race at all. I'm such a big fan of education. The price tag, of course, makes me gulp, but I don't know if it's worth it. It's worth it. But what are your thoughts as an insider in some of the elite organizations in the U.S.? What are your thoughts on the future of education? Are you critical? Are you?
I think I'm hopeful. I mean, I think that there are obviously things that have changed in some really great ways, and some things that have changed in not so great ways. I think my worry is more sort of bandwagon effects, that one institution will do something and then everyone will feel like you have to sort of follow. So I'm not, for example, like online education, like every school sort of has gotten into that, and, for good and for bad. I mean, I think online education has some really great things that it provides, but at the same time, I still think that there's also a need for classroom engagement and really being there. So, there's trade-offs to everything. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that, that we'll continue to see strides in education. I think education is one of those fields and industries in which, things don't move super quickly, and when changes are not made really rapidly. So what I'd love to see is more rapid, just trying new innovations, trying things, and if it doesn't work, understanding that you can still pivot and change, and so that you're not destroying something just because you try something new. So something that I try and do in my classroom, it's something that I hope will continue. So I'm hopeful. I think that and I'm also hopeful that education is going to continue to. I mean, I think we're providing more and more access to education, which is a great thing. And I think, I hope that we continue to keep the really great things, so that it's not just about access, but it's about access as well as depth and breadth and all of these sorts of things, because I don't want to lose the depth just because we're getting the breadth, for example. And I also think that we do need a mix of everything. We need a diversity of people who, I have a mixture of some organizations or some institutions and organizations that I've worked for that are very, very elite, and others that are not. And I think we tend to think that elite has this negative connotation, and I think, but we're all sort of striving for, and same thing, like, the same with the word privilege, right? Privilege seems to have this negative connotation these days, and I think it's because privilege embedded within it is this aspect that it's like an unfair advantage. But, so when we take out sort of the unfair piece, we're all sort of striving and to have that advantage. And there's nothing wrong with having an advantage in something that authentically you're good at or authentically you care about. I think it just becomes tough when you seemingly have that privilege or advantage in everything, and a lot of the things that you undeservedly, in areas that are undeserved. And so if we continue to sort of think through more of those nuances, I think we'll be in a much better place.
Laura, great conversation. I'm excited to get your book. I know it just came out. Tell people where we should send them to learn more about what you're doing and to pick up your book.
Yeah, sure. My website is laurahuang.net, and Huang is Huang, laurahuang.net. And I'm also on social media, Laura Huang, LA, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. And yeah, so, feel free to, I love hearing from people, and I love hearing stories about how people have flipped their own adversity into advantage. So,
Laura, thanks so much for coming on the show, and best of luck with the book launch. The coronavirus has changed the way yoga is learned and taught all around the world. When I started teaching back in 2003, I had just left the US. I was using Skype to communicate with friends and family, and Skype had just launched that same year, 2003. And I thought, this is amazing. I will become a yoga teacher who travels the world teaching via Skype with video calls. Well, it didn't work. Skype was just as bad back then as it is today. Bandwidth was horrible. It was just impossible to do video calls. But all of that has changed today. Many of you know this, but I've been teaching online now for about 10 years. And for the past 3 or 4 years, the majority of my teaching is online. And in some cases, it's even a better experience than in person. I love in-person teaching, and I hope that after coronavirus clears up, I can go back to it. There's nothing that really substitutes for nose-to-toes teacher-student experiences. But wow, there's some amazing things you can do online. Today, for example, I'll spend 4 or even 5 hours working with groups of students all around the world. I'm busier than I've ever been. It's terrible to have lost my studios. It's terrible that they're closed, but there's new change happening, a new shift happening. And here's what's really interesting, which it's really important that we acknowledge, is that more people are doing fitness at home than ever before, and they're really following through. The normal distractions of going out to the store, going out to eat, going out shopping, going out to meet friends, because all of those normal activities are no longer available. People are dedicating more time to themselves, and the inquiries and the bookings and the questions and the engagement online is really remarkable right now. And so despite all of the financial challenges, the health challenges, the global disruption challenges, it's a really interesting time for health and wellness, and I'm excited to report that there's some really positive things happening. So if you're stuck at home right now, if you're passionate about yoga, if you're a yoga or a fitness professional already, or if you'd like to become one, we've got a whole bunch of online courses. We're not new to this. We've been doing this for a long time, and they're more relevant than ever before. So check out yogateacherscollege.com. We've got a number of different programs, from mobility training to yoga trapeze to breath coach training, and even our big 200-hour teacher training course is now online. Thanks so much for your interest, and I hope you're staying safe and staying focused on positive things despite all of the challenges that are in front of us. This week's nutritional tip is in response to a listener question from Sarah on Instagram. And Sarah says, Lucas, what do you think of taking mega dose of vitamin C to stave off COVID-19? I've heard they're using mega doses for treatment. So I have also read that they're using megadoses of vitamin C for treatment, but when you dig into that article, at least the articles that I've read, the megadose that they're referring to is actually 1 gram of vitamin C per day, which is not really a megadose at all. That's kind of a normal dose. And so the US RDA is much, much lower than that. But when people supplement with vitamin C, 500 milligrams to 1 gram is pretty typical. And so that's not considered a megadose by most people's standards. What would be considered a megadose is usually 10 grams plus of vitamin C per day. And there are people who certainly experiment with that for extreme disease like cancer and things like this. And there are certainly people using it with COVID-19. The challenge when you take that much vitamin C is that, first of all, you'll spend all day with explosive diarrhea in the toilet. But probably more troubling is you don't really know where all of that is going and the impact on your body. Vitamin C is water soluble, so it certainly passes through you, but your body has to process it. There are certain theories that perhaps excessive vitamin C leads to things like kidney stones and other problems, renal failure and things like this. I don't know if that's really true, but I can't imagine it's good just to slam your body with vitamin C. I'm taking vitamin C right now, but I would take what I would call a normal dose, like 500 milligrams to 1 gram per day. And there's some decent research to show that it boosts your immunity, but even that research, to be honest, is not that amazing. But I take it anyway. But I wouldn't consider that a megadose, and I also wouldn't recommend just megadosing because of the gastrointestinal effects and also the potential deleterious effects of taking long-term multiple grams of vitamin C per day. We don't really know how that affects the body. Hope that's helpful. I have a listener question from Instagram this week, and it's from Billy. Billy says, Lucas, I just had a hip replacement. Can I do your gravity yoga hip opening stretches? I get this question probably 2 or 3 times a week for many, many years. Hip replacements are fairly common, and when people have hip replacements, they feel this restriction, this limited mobility, and naturally they want to regain, that youthful range of motion. The reality is, whatever you do, make sure you check with your doctor and make sure you explain what you're trying to do. There are all different people in terms of bodies and conditions and post-op things to consider that you want to make sure your doctor is on board. The other thing to remember is that gravity yoga is not gentle. It's a really, really strong practice. We have a whole bunch of people with hip replacements using the program, but you want to make sure that it's safe for you. I'm no expert in hip replacements, but from what I understand, from what I've experienced as a teacher, the time when people are most motivated to do rehab and deep stretching is usually right after surgery, and that's probably not the best time to do really, really strong stretches. And of course, the real factor here is trying to limit the amount of times that you need it redone. So I had a friend, for example, who got his first hip replacement when he was about 27, and his biggest concern is that he'll have to have 2 or 3 of them in his lifetime, which is quite a major operation. So whatever you're doing, err on the side of caution. This goes for really any kind of joint injury, joint condition, especially a joint replacement. Err on the side of caution. Make sure you get a clearance from your doctor and be careful. Hope that helps. Billy.
This week's iTunes review is by Virgo831. Virgo831 says, I have heard the talk of yoga, seen the yoga, tried the yoga, spoken on yoga, but I have never been the yoga, and I am finally ready. This podcast, The Lucas Rockwood Show, really has reached my soul. Congratulations, Virgo831. You have won a yoga trapeze. Email us at podcast@yogabody.com and we will ship it to you.
If you're a regular Yoga Talk Show listener, you'll definitely want to get on my email list. Go to yogabody.com/sign me up. When you enter your email address there, we always have free giveaways every month, yoga straps, water bottles, discounts in our shop, and all kinds of other things. When you sign up at yogabody.com/sign me up, I'll send you just one email a week with updates about the show, special offers, new courses, and valuable information that I think you'll find useful. So go to yogabody.com/sign me up to claim your free prize now.